Welcome to this explainer. You know, when we think about the Indian National Congress and the monumental fight for independence, we usually picture grassroots political campaigns, right? But the historical record actually reveals a hidden and frankly highly unexpected origin story. Let's dive right in.
So what could possibly connect the drive for Indian independence with Western esoteric traditions? We're talking about Freemasonry and the occult here. On the surface, they seem like entirely different universes. But as we're going to see from the source material today, they weren't just vaguely linked, they were intricately intertwined.
It turns out a really unique convergence of Eastern tradition and Western esoteric movements built the philosophical bridge that literally shaped a nation. We're talking about the blending of Neo-Vedanta, Theosophy, and Transcendentalism into what they called a universal religion. And the wild part? This wasn't just some fringe spiritual exercise. It was the actual intellectual foundation of the Indian National Congress itself.
Okay, moving into Section 1, Designing a Universal Religion. Let's take a look at how traditional Indian teachings were meticulously adapted for a global audience back in the late 19th century.
Now, you might be thinking this was just an uninterrupted continuation of ancient traditions, but it really wasn't. Neo-Vedanta was a highly deliberate, modern interpretation of Hinduism. It emerged specifically to translate these incredibly complex Indian philosophies into a framework that perfectly aligned with Western philosophical standards.
To put that into perspective, just think about the vast, sprawling complexity of traditional Hinduism. To appeal directly to Western, rationalist minds, reformers essentially created what we can call a homogenized Hinduism. By leaning heavily into concepts like monotheism and Advaita Vedanta, they streamlined the spirituality into something super digestible for the West.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because this universalist vision perfectly mirrored Freemasonry. Take the classic Masonic symbol of the point within a circle, which represents the origin point of all religious manifestations. According to the historical research, this wasn't a coincidence at all. Neo-Vedanta was actively presented as advancing the exact same goal as Freemasonry, to become a true center of union for men of all creeds.
Which brings us to Section 2, the London Social Bridge. Because to truly take root, this shared philosophy needed a physical and social space to bring Indian elites and the British establishment together.
This timeline maps out the cross-cultural pollination that happened over half a century, jumping back and forth across the globe. It all kicked off with Raja Ram Mohan Roy, the founder of the Brahma Samaj, whose writings deeply impacted American transcendentalists like Ralph Waldo Emerson. That really set the intellectual stage for everything that followed.
So, by 1842, this intellectual exchange had found a physical home. Fancy London salons like Gore House became these intimate, buzzing spaces where Eastern philosophy actually met British high society. During his visit, Dwarkanath Tagore frequented Lady Blessington's incredibly fashionable salon, which allowed the so-called enlightened Indian elite to rub shoulders with the British establishment.
And honestly, this is where the history gets truly wild, because this social bridge included some deep dives into the occult. Prominent politicians, we're talking about novelist Edward Bulwer-Lytton and future Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, frequently gathered at this very salon to participate in crystal gazing and seances, right alongside visiting Indian thinkers. The political elite and the esoteric world were quite literally operating in the exact same room.
All right, let's jump to Section 3. Theosophy births the INC. This is where the historical mystery reaches its real climax, the actual founding of the Indian National Congress in 1885.
Get this, the political vehicle for Indian independence was literally driven by someone who believed he was channeling the energies of esoteric ascended masters. Allan Octavian Hume, the founder of the INC, was a highly dedicated member of the Theosophical Society. He firmly believed that enlightened beings known as Mahatmas were actively supporting India's liberation behind the scenes to forge a brand new world order. Now, check out this number, 50%. Exactly half of the early presidents of the Indian National Congress were Freemasons. Just let that sink in for a second. The Theosophical Society acted as the primary vehicle channeling the Western-educated Indian elite toward independence, resulting in a political body utterly dominated by men who were initiated into esoteric traditions.
And we aren't just talking about fringe members here. We are talking about foundational, heavyweight figures of modern India, like Womesh Chandra Banerjee and Dadabhai Naoroji. This universal religion framework was the active, binding glue that allowed vastly different groups to cooperate under a single nationalist banner.
Let's move on to Section 4, Shaping the Nationalist Icons.
How exactly did this universal religion framework impact the most famous figures in Indian history?
As you'll see, even the most universally recognized icons were profoundly shaped by these esoteric networks. Swami Vivekananda, who is famous for bringing Hinduism to the global stage, was a Freemason who utilized these frameworks for a nationalist agenda. And Mahatma Gandhi, a disciple of the prominent theosophist Besant, directly credited Theosophy for instilling in him his core belief that all religions are true.
Even Jawaharlal Nehru openly acknowledged that his entire worldview was forged in this unique crucible. Initiated by Besant herself, he completely embraced the fact that his foundational beliefs were a queer mixture, stemming from these universalist influences. The key architects of the modern Indian nation were, literally without exception, intertwined with this movement.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Exporting to the West. The final step was taking this highly synthesized spirituality and projecting it right back onto the global stage.
The circuit was finally completed at the 1893 Parliament of the World's Religions. With monumental figures like Vivekananda taking the stage, the very ideas that had been shaped by interactions with Western esotericists and rationalists were now being formally introduced back to a super-eager Western audience, packaged as the quintessential wisdom of the East.
Now, to make all this acceptable to Victorian sensibilities, reformers actively deodorized the tradition. They essentially scrubbed away the controversial, messier tantric elements in favor of a cleaner, abstract philosophy. But, this sparked fierce debate. Sir John Woodruff, who wrote under the name Arthur Avalon, actually championed those raw occult elements, arguing they didn't need sanitizing and represented a completely pure ethical system in their own right.
So, we've seen how Neo-Vedanta, Theosophy, and Freemasonry converge to create a massive political force. But I want to leave you with this provocative thought to ponder. As we navigate our hyper-connected world today, what is truly gained and what is permanently lost when we rewrite ancient traditions to build a universal bridge? When we homogenize the complex just for the sake of unity, how much of the original truth actually remains? Thanks for joining me for this explainer today, and keep questioning the history you think you know.